I wasn't sure if my story was effective enough to get the right point across about why people with eating disorders need the FREED Act. But the facts are there. My story is the reality of so many others who face discrimination every day when they seek treatment for their eating disorder. And my story is important because not one single person, including me, deserves to be discriminated against for suffering with an eating disorder. Sometime during early high school, while participating in a varsity sports team each season, the thoughts and behaviors began, and once into college, I developed an eating disorder. I was hesitant to think that I had a true eating disorder. I mean, sure, I was a little underweight, and my calorie counting showed that I was only consuming the bare minimum to stay alive, but I thought all young women did this. When I realized my eating disorder thoughts and behaviors were a problem, around the age of 21, I finally decided to reach out for help. I called my insurance company, and after unsuccessful attempts at finding help that specialized in eating disorders, I decided to go out of network, where I found a nutritionist and a therapist. My therapy and nutritional counseling lasted about 5 months, until at $150 and $100 a session, respectively, I was no longer able to afford the help that I needed. I had been submitting claims to my insurance company, but they offered no reimbursement for either therapy or nutritional visits. However, had I been diabetic or had bariatric surgery and needed to see a nutritionist, my visits would have been covered. Because my insurance company didn't think I needed a nutritionist, I began to think the same way. Due to finances, I was forced to cut out every aspect of my treatment except my primary care physician, who fortunately was partially covered under my insurance plan. I tried to convince myself that this break in treatment wasn't so bad. After all, I had made positive strides during the past 5 months, and I'd be okay on my own. This is just one of the many ways my eating disorder lied to me, and it would soon become clear that I needed much more than 5 months of therapy and nutritional counseling in order to recover. At age 21, during Christmas break, I learned to purge. Around the same time, I had asked my primary care physician if I could train for a marathon. Had she known more about the toll that restricting and purging take on a person's body, I think she would have advised against this. But she hadn't had training on eating disorders, and she gave me her blessing to start training. I think had I still been seeing my therapist and nutritionist, they would have advised against it, because emotionally and nutritionally, I was in no shape to be training for such a long run. Marathon training was a blur. I made it through each grueling run. My body was used to the torture of being pushed to the limit. The more miles I ran, the hungrier I was, so the more I ate. I was gaining weight, but surprisingly was unfazed by my new larger body. For the first time since early high school, I felt strong and healthy. Once the race was over, I sank. I had nothing left to strive for. A post-race depression set in, and a few months later, my eating disorder symptoms slowly began to return. I decided to try and find a new therapist in my network. After 8 appointments with various in-network mental health counselors, none of whom were ED experts, I became discouraged. Not one of them understood how to treat eating disorders. Not one of them understood how to treat me. I searched for out-of-network providers and found one after 2 tries. She negotiated a rate of $100 a session, which to me was cheap for an out-of-network specialist. 3 months after the marathon and 1 month into seeing my new therapist, I started to feel the effects of my caloric restriction. Chest pains, palpitations, numbness, tingling, everything they warned you about in Bayer commercials. On a Tuesday night in January 2009, I called my friend and asked her to take me to the George Washington University emergency room because I was having all of the symptoms I just mentioned. Because I told the emergency room nurse that I had an eating disorder, that I had chest pains, I was seen right away. I reported my history of restricting and overexercising. My EKG was normal, my pulse also normal. My electrolytes and other blood work appeared to be normal as well. I asked to be discharged because it seemed like they were not going to find anything wrong with me. My discharge papers gave me information about how to deal with anxiety. I didn't have anxiety, I had an eating disorder. I felt ashamed and embarrassed for having wasted the ER staff time. The next night, I felt the pains again, only this time they were sharp rather than numb. I returned to the emergency room with a trusted friend who serves as my patient advocate. Because everything appeared normal, the doctor once again handed me my discharge papers with instructions on how to deal with anxiety. and told me I was free to go. My advocate demanded that he double-check my potassium, so he finally agreed, only after he lectured us that he was about to end his shift. When the potassium test appeared to come back normal, the doctor wished me the best and told me he understood what I was going through. His wife also suffered from an eating disorder. I still had the chest pains, yet I was being sent home. I wondered, would Dick Cheney have been sent home from the GW hospital while still on Angel Stevens? As a young, athletic female, however, my physical symptoms were brushed off as anxiety, and once again, I felt like the message conveyed to me was that my eating disorder wasn't that bad of a problem. I left feeling more alone than ever. Because my chest pains and numbness continued, my advocate recommended I see a cardiologist. I was referred to one of the best in the Washington, D.C. area, someone who was known to have seen other patients with eating disorders. While the doctor himself was supposedly self-educated about eating disorders, his staff was not. When I was undergoing an echocardiogram, the technician inquired as to why I was there, since I appeared so young and healthy. I suffer from an eating disorder, I told him. He replied, "Oh, that's one of those mental disorders, right?" "Yes," I said, "but it has physical repercussions as well." He asked, "Isn't that something you just sort of get over in time, once you've gained weight?" I replied, trying to stay calm, "It's been a long battle. I don't know when I'll be over it." I couldn't hold back the tears. How could someone in the medical profession be so unaware of the cardiovascular effects of starvation and overexercising? There I was, lying on a table, half naked, seeking help from a professional, only to feel discarded yet again after my eating disorder was dismissed as something I should just be able to get over. Later on, I would find out the cardiologist did not take my insurance, and I owed a bill of approximately $2,000. The cardiologist reported that I had a healthy runner's heart. Everything appeared fine and I was free to go. If I had any more pains, he recommended I come back. Once I received the bill a few weeks later and saw the amount, I knew a return visit would be highly unlikely. My normal test results convinced me of my eating disorder that I could continue restricting and exercising. A few weeks later, I had the chest pains again. Rather than do what any other person with chest pains would do, go to the emergency room, I sat and wondered what to do. If I went to the emergency room again, I was afraid they would tell me it was just anxiety, and I would waste another $50 co-payment as well as lab fees. So instead of seeking help, I took a chance on my life. I stayed home, scared out of my mind. What if my heart stops in my sleep? I could hear it beating through my ears, feel it beating from underneath my sheet, my comforter. Is this it? Will I wake up tomorrow and leave this worry behind? Or will I not wake up at all? According to these tests and medical opinions from doctors who are not educated about eating disorders, I was perfectly fine. I was not fine, and my advocate worked hard to convince me of this. She educated me about what the doctors didn't know. For example, she told me the levels of blood work that might appear fine for a normal person are in fact not fine for someone with an eating disorder. A potassium level of 3.0 in a healthy person can be okay. But if my potassium was at 3.0, that was too low. Why? Because of purging and restricting and the complications low potassium bring to the heart, including death. Also, my advocate educated me about what normal QTc intervals should be, which is the measurement on an EKG. I had been told mine were fine, but in fact mine were too far apart, but this was dismissed because I was athletic. My low heart rate was also dismissed because I was young and athletic. I was surprised when I learned that Lance Armstrong's resting heart rate is 50. My heart rate wasn't low because I trained as hard as Lance Armstrong. It was low because my heart was conserving the minimal energy it had left over after purging. But doctors didn't know this, and I was feeling little hope in getting the help I needed to recover. A journal entry from the night I decided to not go to the ER. I am back to feeling utterly and completely alone. No one understands, and I'm tired of trying to explain it. People are frustrated because I'm frustrated, and it's not worth it. I seriously was scared that I was going to die yesterday. I could have just died on my couch. I wouldn't have cared. At least the pain would stop. I hate this. I feel like I will never achieve my dreams or do anything worthy. My discipline, dedication, and hopes are lost. I woke up the next morning, but the worry and fear did not rest. I would go to the GW ER 3 more times, and end up with the same